Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord, the Liberator, the Deliverer, Chooser of the Slain, and the Shadowy Lord, is the primarch of the Raven Guard Space Marine Legion. Corax presented a striking countenance, at least when he wished to be seen. His skin was alabaster white, and he was possessed of shoulder-length hair, as black as the feathers of his namesake, the Raven. Most remarkable and unsettling were his eyes, which appeared as entirely black shards of solid shadow. His sable power armor was edged with fine golden figures, and upon his back was mounted a jetpack formed into a pair of articulated, raven-like pinions that he wielded as a murderous, blood-edged weapon of war. Though few even amongst his Gene sons know of this, Corax is blessed with the ability to pass unnoticed should he will it, this ability allowing him to slip from the perception of his enemies even when he was in plain view. Like all the primarchs, Corax was separated from the Emperor while still an infant by the ruinous powers of chaos. He was eventually discovered in a lightless chamber far beneath the surface of a barren moon called Lycaeus, the desolated but inhabitable moon of the planet Kiava. At this time, Kiava was a technologically advanced forge vault, providing its city-sized manufactoria with minerals extracted from the non-atmospheric moon by legions of mine slaves. Above the cavern was a mighty glacier, and the primarch might never have been discovered at all were it not for the arrival of a team of Lycaean miners pursuing a mineral seam. The primarch was taken in by the slaves and hidden from the mine's cruel overseers. Under the iron watch of heavily armored guards, the inhabitants of Lycaeus, criminals, political opponents, and workers who had failed to meet their quotas, had long provided the rulers of Kiava a free and unlimited source of manpower. After the slave girl, Nasturi Ephraenia, discovered the white-skinned child who became Corax, the Deliverer, and that tongue, they kept him from their masters, training him in the various skills they believe a leader and warrior needed: urban warfare, close combat, and demolitions, as well as political and philosophical matters. Ultimately, his abnormally fast maturation comforted the slaves, and they became fixed in their belief that he was the savior they waited for. Educated to be a leader as well as a rebel, he rapidly began his task by organizing the workers into fight teams, promoting the best of the men as squad leaders. He began building huge stockpiles of weapons, concealing them in numerous secret caches. He ordered a campaign of psychological warfare, launching riots and strikes to build up followers in the workers' rebellion and to stretch the garrison's strength and morale to breaking point. Waiting for the opportune time to strike, Corax's forces launched their attack, taking key security points and destroying them by crude force or sabotage, killing every man of the Lycaeus defense forces. In yet another convergence of great events, it was in the immediate aftermath of the rebellion of the present moon Lycaeus and the opening salvos of the atomic bombardment of Kiava that the Emperor arrived in 922 M30 to reclaim his lost Gene son. Unlike events surrounding so many other such meetings, however, the Emperor came alone, without an expeditionary fleet of the Great Crusade, and the next solar day left alone. While it is known that the Master of Mankind and the 19th Legion's Primarch spoke for long solar hours. What passed between them remains a matter of conjecture. With the benefit of hindsight, some have claimed that the Emperor spoke to Corax of things moral humans. Even some other Primarchs were not yet ready to hear of the truth of those inhuman powers that seethe within the warp and the darkness soon to come. Certainly, it appears that when the full horror of the War Master Horus's treachery unfolded solar decades later, there were elements of it Corax seemed to have been forewarned of, though he only ever passed such knowledge on to his forces as and when they needed and were ready to assimilate it. Whatever the truth, one thing is known to have passed between father and Jean's son that night. The Emperor would leave Corax to complete his mission and to defeat the tech girls of Kiava. Only later would he be ready to assume command of his legion. It was as if in leaving Corax to liberate Kiava on his own, the Emperor was ensuring the Primarch learned and assimilated the most vital lessons of war. The Emperor departed, leaving his son to complete his task using only those weapons he had to hand. Those weapons turned out to be a stockpile of atomic barrages and mining charges the masters of Kiava had secreted on Lycaeus, believing them safe from the multitudes they ruled over. In their hubris, the girls never imagined that the slave miners might one day cast off their shackles and claim those weapons as their own. Even as the girls sought to launch a counterattack against the massively outnumbered freedom fighters, Corax knew the terrible order he must give. Using the steep gravity will that tethered Kiava and its moon, the Primarch committed to a full-scale atomic bombardment of the vast manufactory cities below. Even as the atomic fires blossomed on the face of Kiava, Corax demonstrated that by slaying thousands, millions would be saved. This, some would later claim, was the lesson the Emperor meant Corax to learn, and one that would temper his nature against the numerous challenges few but the Primarchs of the Legions Astartes can fully comprehend. Kiava was liberated, and Lycaeus renamed Deliverance. Soon the Mechanicum stepped in to retake control over their ancient colony world, and the planet was rebuilt to the benefit of the Imperium, while the Black Tower, which had once housed the Kiavaran garrison of Lycaeus, became the Raven Spire, the fortress monastery of the Raven Guard Legion. By the time the Raven Lord took command of his legion, the Great Crusade was over a Terran century old. Corax was quick to impose the style of war he had perfected on Lycaeus over that which had come to define the 19th Legion, melding stealth and guile with vigilance and swiftness. It was during these early years that much of the native demeanor of the old 19th Legion, particularly the more cold-blooded ways of the Zerek tribes who had formed its original Terran intake of Astartes, was purged. The Legion had so often served in oppression, repression, and occupation forces that Corax saw in some of the Terrans of his 19th Legion something akin to the slavers of Lycaeus. Several of the Legion's highest-ranking officers were displaced or reassigned to non-command roles, including Arcas Fall, who had commanded the 19th Legion as its Legion Master for 3 solar decades before the coming of the Raven Lord. Under the Primarch's guidance, distilled into a series of battle mantras, the Raven Guard developed their skills to preternatural levels. As the Great Crusade ground ever onwards, Kiava assumed its position in the Emperor's Imperium of Worlds. While its output was not equal to that of a fully fledged Forge World of the Mechanicum, with the aid of the tech priests of Mars, its forges and manufactories produced and exported vast quantities of material, as well as a number of the more specialized machines and weapons required by the Raven Guard Legion. The Guild artificers attempted to retain their closest secret from the Mechanicum with some small measure of success, and clung on to their independence from Mars. Having remained self-sufficient throughout the lonely Dark Ages, Kiava remained unwilling to cede its secrets to outsiders, the only authority it recognized being that of the Raven Guard. Of all the Mechanicum's subsidiary domains, Kiava maintained relations with only one, Griffin IV. The terms of this relationship remain unclear, but because the Legio Griffonicus fought alongside the Raven Guard throughout several of its larger-scale campaigns, it can be assumed that some manner of mutual pact was and perhaps still remains in place. One of the more notable campaigns carried out by Corax and his Raven Guard Legion during the Great Crusade was the Imperial Compliance of the Istvaan system, located in the northern reaches of the Ultima Segmentum, far beyond the established heartlands of the Imperium. Though cut off, scout vessels ranging ahead of Corax's 27th Expeditionary Fleet had found evidence that human life on Istvaan V had managed to maintain a largely cohesive, industrialized society that had endured the millennia intact, making it a high priority for contact and absorption into the Imperium. The task of bringing the Istvaan system into Imperial compliance fell to Corax and his Raven Guard Legion, as the warriors of the 19th Legion had a reputation for the use of surgical strikes and precision in such matters. The black-hulled strike cruisers and gunships of the Raven Guard attacked without warning, systematically destroying Istvaan III's military infrastructure and taking charge of its seats of governance. An Istvanian delegation formally surrendered before the primarch Corax and the 800 companies of the Raven Guard Space Marines that comprised his 19th Legion. The Istvanians kneel before the sable-armored conquerors as a defeated foe, but were welcomed into the fold as men of the Imperium. Though they had waged war against one another, the imperial truth had prevailed, and the Istvanians had sworn to accept its teachings. Vardis Praal was left behind as the world's imperial planetary governor to command Istvaan III in the name of the Imperium, to ensure continued compliance and manage the dismantling of the traditional religious structures that define the planet's society. The established capital, located at the sprawling proto-hive of Kree Vanak, Istvaan III's political and cultural capital, Coral City, was chosen as the site of imperial power. It was the need to conduct war in a more conventional manner that led to one of the greatest setbacks in the 19th Legion's history. Soon after Horus was declared the Imperial War Master, the Occam Sothis cluster had been brought to Imperial compliance by the Lunar Wolves in the opening years of the Great Crusade, but its people had fallen to a form of mass psychosis and violently rejected unity with Terra. This unheralded secession was later determined to have been caused by Xenos parasites, which matured within the eye sockets of their hosts. As they matured, the parasites gained rudimentary control over their hosts and formed what amounted to a wholly alien, Gestalt consciousness focused on a cabal of primary hosts dubbed the Unsighted Kings. Horus had formulated a plan to cast down the Unsighted Kings in a lightning war. The War Master's plan called for the bulk of 4 legions: the Lunar Wolves, Space Wolves, Iron Warriors, and Raven Guard, to converge on the heavily fortified lair of the Unsighted Kings before a final overwhelming assault was launched. Corax mustered the Raven Guard before Gate 42. Corax assigned many of his Terran-dominated companies to the vanguard, in particular those whose captains appeared the most willing to play their part in the War Master's plan. The assault that followed was hailed as the Legion's darkest hour. At the height of the battle, the assault companies were decimated, and the attack faltering in the face of overwhelming fire. Corax himself led the Forlorn Hope, his battle cry firing the 19th Legion to such efforts that the breach was carried and Gate 42 taken. The honor of slaying the Unsighted Kings was claimed by Horus as War Master, and at the moment of their execution, the Xenos' hold over the population was dispelled. The Akim Sothis cluster was delivered, and the War Master's prize was reclaimed. The cost was terrible, however. Thousands of Raven Guard, the bulk of them Terran-born, had given their lives before the shattered walls. The 19th Legion was sorely depleted, leaving only 80,000 legionnaires under the Primarch's command, and making it the smallest of the Legion's Astartes. Corax removed himself and his legion from his brother's command, swearing bitterly never to serve alongside Horus again. A 2-year engagement through a sector of space claimed by the remnants of the broken Eldar race. The Raven Guard performed admirably in the verdant Eldar seed walls of the Skyland sector, hounding the Eldar in a series of strike and fade attacks that decimated their already battered military forces. Such was the success of the fighting in the sector, which eventually saw the expulsion of the Eldar and the Imperium claim its rich walls. Due to this outstanding success, the new Mark IV armor was approved for final deployment, and the majority of improvements suggested by the Raven Guard were adopted. The new armor, later dubbed Corvus Pattern Armor in honor of the Raven Guard, was placed into full-scale production only a few solar months before the outbreak of Horus's rebellion against the Emperor. During the drop site massacre on Istvaan V, the Loyalist Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard legions were deployed in the first wave of the assault against the known traitor legions: the Lunar Wolves, the World Eaters, the Emperor's Children, and the Death Guard. Thousands of drop pods and storm birds were deployed for the initial assault. The first wave was under the overall command of the Primarch Ferrus Manus, and besides his own 10th Legion, the Salamanders led by Vulcan and the Raven Guard under the command of their Primarch Corax joined them. Vulcan's Legion assaulted the left flank of the traitors' battle line, while Ferrus Manus, the Iron Hands' first captain Gabriel Santor, and 10 full companies of elite Mala exterminators charged straight into the center of the enemy lines. Meanwhile, Corax's Legion held the right flank of the enemy's position. The odds were considered equal: 30,000 traitor marines against 40,000 loyalists. Horus was aware of the location of the loyalists' drop site, and his troops fell upon the loyalist legions. The battlefield of Istvaan V was a slaughterhouse of epic proportions. Treacherous warriors, twisted by hatred, fought their former brothers in arms, in a conflict unparalleled in its bitterness. The mighty Titan war engines of the Machine Guard walked the planet's surface, and death followed in their wake. The blood of heroes and traitors flowed in rivers, and the hooded heretics, adepts of the Dark Mechanicum, unleashed perversions of ancient technology stolen from the Eurasian technocracy to wreak bloody havoc amongst the loyalists. All across the Urgal Depression, hundreds died with every passing second. The traitor forces held, but their line was bending beneath the fury of the first loyalist assault. The forces on the surface have been embattled for almost 3 hours with no clear victor emerging. The traitors all knew their parts to play in this performance. They were all aware of the blood they must shed to spare their species from destruction and install Horus as the new master of mankind. Though the Iron Hands, Raven Guard and Salamanders had managed to make a full combat drop and secure the drop site known as the Urgal Depression, they did so at a heavy cost. Overwhelmed with rage, the headstrong Pharaoh's Manus disregarded the counsel of his brothers Corax and Vulcan and hurled himself against the fleeing rebels, seeking to bring Fulgrim to personal combat. His veteran troops, comprising the majority of the 10th Legion's Terminators and Dreadnoughts, followed. What had begun as a massed strike against the traitor's position was rapidly turning into one of the largest engagements of the entire Great Crusade. The Urgal Depression was churned to ruination beneath the boots and tank treads of countless thousands of Astartes warriors and their legion's armored divisions. The loyal primarchs could be found where the fighting was thickest. Corax of the Raven Guard, borne aloft on black wings, bound to a fire-breathing flight back. Lord Pharos of the Iron Hands at the heart of the battlefield, his silver hands crushing any traitors that came within reach, while he pursued and dragged back those who sought to withdraw. And lastly, Vulcan of the Salamanders, armored in overlapping artificer plating, thunder clapping from his war hammer as it bounded into yielding armor, shattering it like porcelain. The traitorous primarchs slew in mirror image to their brothers, Angron of the World Eaters, hewing with wild abandon as he racked his chain blades left and right, barely aware of who fell before him. Fulgrim of the lamentably named Embra's children, laughing as he deflected the clumsy sweeps of Iron Hands warriors, never stopping in his graceful movements for even a moment. Mortarion of the Death Guard, in disgusting echo of ancient Terran myth, harvesting life with each reaving sweep of his scythe. And Horus, War Master of the Imperium, the brightest star and greatest of the Emperor's sons, he stood watching the destruction while his legions took to the field, their liege lord content in his fortress rising from the far edge of the Raven, shielded and unseen by his brothers, still waging war in the Emperor's name. At last, above this maelstrom of grinding ceramite, booming tank cannons and shattering bolters, the gunships, drop pods, and assault landers of the loyalist second wave burned through the atmosphere on screaming thrusters. The sky fell dark, with the weak sun eclipsed by 10,000 avian shadows, and the cheering roar sent up by the loyalists was loud enough to shake the air itself. The traitors, the bloodied and battered legions loyal to Horus, fell into a fighting withdrawal without hesitation. The second wave of loyalist Space Marine legions descended upon the landing zone on the northern edge of the Urgal Depression. Hundreds of storm birds and thunderhawks roared towards the surface, their armored hulls gleaming as the power of another 4 Astartes legions arrived on Istvaan V. yet the Space Marine legions of the reserve were no longer loyal to the Emperor, having already secretly sworn themselves to chaos and the cause of Horus. The Night Lords of Conrad Curze, the Iron Warriors of Perturabo, the Ward Bearers of Lorgar Aurelian, and the Alpha Legion of Alpharius represented a force larger than that which had first begun the assault on Istvaan V. The secret traitor legions mustered in the landing zone, armed and ready for battle, and bloodied and fresh. The Iron Warriors had claimed the highest ground, taking the loyalist landing site with all the appearance of reinforcing it through the erection of prefabricated blast steel bunkers. The Ward Bearers posted their brothers' legions on one flank of the Urgal Depression, while the Night Lords took positions on the opposite side. Down the line, past the mounting masses of Iron Warriors battle tanks and assembling Astartes, First Captain Sevatar of the Night Lords and his first company elite, the Atramenta, took up defensive positions. Both the Ward Bearers and the Night Lords were to be the anvil, while the Iron Warriors would be the hammer yet to fall. The enemy would stagger back to them, exhausted, clutching empty bolters and broken blades, believing their presence to be a reprieve. Dragging their wounded and dead behind them, Corax and Vulcan led their forces back to the drop site to regroup and to allow the warriors of the recently arrived brother primarchs of the second wave a measure of the glory in defeating Horus. Though they voxed hails requesting medical aid and supply, the line of Astartes atop the northern ridge remained grimly silent as the exhausted warriors of the Raving Guard and Salamanders came to within 100 meters of their allies. It was then that Horus revealed his treachery and sprung his lethal trap. Inside the black fortress where Horus had made his lair, a lone flare shot skyward, exploding in a hellish red glow that lit the battlefield below. The fire of betrayal roared from the barrels of 1,000 guns as the second wave of Astartes revealed where their true loyalties now lay. Ferrous Manus locked on in stunned horror as Fulgrim laughed at the look on his brother's face, as the forces of his allies opened fire upon the Salamanders and Raving Guard, killing hundreds in the fury of the first few moments, hundreds more in the seconds following, as volley after volley of bolter fire and missiles scythed through their unsuspecting ranks. Even as terrifying carnage was being wreaked upon the loyalists below, the retreating forces of the War Master turned and brought their weapons to bear on the enemy warriors within their midst. Hundreds of World Eaters, sons of Horus, and the Death Guard fell upon the veteran companies of the Iron Hands, and though the warriors of the 10th Legion continued to fight gallantly, they were hopelessly outnumbered and would soon be hacked to pieces. The Iron Hands had damned themselves by remaining in the field. The Raving Guard front ranks went down as if scythed, harvested in a spilling line of detonating bolter shells, shattered armor and puffs of bloody mist. Black-armored Astartes tumbled to their hands and knees, only to be cut down by the sustained volley, finishing those who fell beneath the initial storm of head and chest shots. Seconds after the first chatter of bolters, beams of achingly bright laser slashed from behind the Ward Bearers as the cannon mounts of land raiders, predators, and defensive bastion turrets gouged through the Raving Guard and the ground they stood upon. The Iron Warriors and Ward Bearers kept reloading, opening fire again, hurling grenades, and prepared to fall back. The Ward Bearers Legion had taken up landing positions on the west of the field, ready to sweep down and engage the Raving Guard from the flank. The Raven Guard were confronted by the treacherous sword bearers, with their primarch Lorgar, the first captain Corvus and the first chaplain Erebus at their vanguard. The two legions fought one another in bitter combat. Amidst the carnage and the slaughter, the anger of a demigod was released. Beyond anger, beyond rage, it went beyond both, for it was wrath in physical form. Lord Corax, primarch of the Raven Guard, charged into the ranks of the traitorous sword bearers, a blur of charcoal armor and black blades, butchering with an ease that belied his ferocity. Soon the voices of dying sword bearers became a conflicting chorus over the vox as they screamed for help. Argeltal, the Crimson Lord and leader of the demon-possessed Astartes, known as the Gal Vorpak, Lorgar's blessed sons, led the possessed Chaos Space Marines forward to meet the end at the hands of a demigod. Meanwhile, Lorgar mirrored his brother Primarch's actions and slaughtered enemy Astartes with contemptuous ease. Just as the ward bearers struggled to stand before Corax, so too did the Raven Guard fall back and die in droves. Suddenly, the Urizen halted his attack. He noticed that Corax was wading through the Gal Vorpak, ripping his demon-possessed Crimson warriors apart. Given a blessed respite from the Primarch's murderous advance, the Raven Guard were falling back from him in a black tide. They left their dead in a carpet at the Primarch's feet. Despite the protestations of both Corvus and Erebus, Lorgar disregarded their counsel and sprinted forwards across the churned earth and dead bodies of his brother's legion to engage in a battle he had no hope of winning. He saw his brother, a man he had barely spoken to in 2 centuries of life, a man he barely knew, butchering his sons in a vicious rage. There was no thought of conversion, no hope of bringing Corax into the fold, or enlightening him enough to seize this murderous rampage. Lorgar's own anger rose to the fore, burning away the passionless killing of only moments ago. As the Ward Bearer's Primarch hammered his way through the Raven Guard to reach his brother, he felt power seethe within him, aching to rise out. He felt his unchained power reaching out, not only to enhance his physical form, but reaching to his sons across the battlefield. And there he stood at the heart of the killing fields, winged and hallowed by amorphous contrails of psychic fire, shouting his brother's name into the storm. Corax answered with a shriek of his own, the call of the betrayer, the cry of the betrayed, and the Raven met the heretic in a clash of Crozius and Clone. The Primarchs fought in furious combat, Corax fighting to kill, while Lorgar fought to stay alive. During the duel, Corax hurled insults and accusations at his former brother. He wanted to know why Lorgar and his legion had committed such treachery. Lorgar shared with his brother of the future visions he had seen of their father, a bloodless corpse, enthroned upon a throne of gold and screaming into the void forever. Angered by his brother's lies, Corax lashed out furiously with his pair of lightning claws across Lorgar's face, cutting the meat of his cheeks deeply. Even should Lorgar somehow manage to escape his ultimate fate this day, he would bear these scars until the day he died. The two Primarchs traded vicious blows, but the Raven Lord had the advantage, not only speed and fitness, but of also being a penultimate warrior with decades of fighting experience. Lorgar did not, for he had always been more of a scholar than a warrior, and his lack of experience cost him dearly as Corax impaled Lorgar through his stomach, the tips of his meter-long talons glinting to the side of his spine as they thrust out his back. Such a blow meant little to a primarch. Only when Corax heaved upwards did Lorgar stagger. The claws bit and cut, sawing through the ward-bearer's body. Lorgar's bowed scepter maul illuminarum slipped from the impaled primarch's fists. Those same hands wrapped around Corax's throat, even as the Raven Lord was carving his brother in half. Even as he tightened his grip on Corax's throat, the Raven Lord remained untroubled by his weaker brother's grip. Lorgar crashed his forehead against Corax's face, shattering his brother's nose, but still he couldn't free himself. The Raven Lord gave no ground, even as a second, third, and a fourth headbutt decimated his delicate features. The claws jerked, snagged against Lorgar's enhanced bones. Corax tore them free, inflicting more damage than the first impaling had done. Blood hissed and popped as it evaporated on the force-fielded blades. Lorgar fell to his knees, hands clutched over the ruination of his stomach. As Corax stepped closer, he raised his one functioning claw to execute his brother. Lorgar screamed his defiance at Corax, lost in the irony that of all the sons of the Emperor, he was the one soul in 20 who'd never wished to be a soldier, and now here he would die at the heart of a battlefield. As the claw fell, it struck opposing metal. Corax looked to meet eyes as black as his, in a face as pale as his own. His claws strained against a mirroring weapon, both sets of blades scrapping as they ground against each other, one claw seeking to fall and kill, the other unyielding in its rising defense. Where the Raven Guard Primarch's features were fierce with effort, the other face wore a grin. It was a smile both taut and mirthless, a dead man's smile. Once his lips surrendered to rigor mortis, it was Conrad Curze. Corax sought to wrench his claw free, but the Night Haunter's second gauntlet closed on his brother's wrist, so that Corax would be unable to fly away and escape his fate. Curze looked upon his prostrate brother and ordered him to rise from his knees. Disgusted at his cowardice, Corax was not idle as this exchange took place. He fired his flight pack, burning his fuel reserves to escape Curze's grip. The Raven Lord's claw ripped free, and Corax soared skyward, carried on jet thrust, away from Curze's rising laughter. Curze then shoved Lorgar back towards his ward bearers. Around them both, the Grey Legion warred with the warriors in black. Lorgar thanked his brother for saving his life, but Curze warned him that he would let him die next time. As he bit out another retort, his words halted as he took in the scene of the transformed Gal Vorbak. Their armor was crimson and ridged bone, great claws, both metallic weapons and fleshy, jointed talons extended from bestial arms. Every helm was horned, and every face plate was split by a demon's skullish leer. Disgusted by this horrific sight, Curze turned his back on Lorgar and commented that he was so much more than merely foul. He was rancid with corruption. Though grievously wounded, Lorgar would live. The outnumbered loyalists were then surrounded and brutally butchered. Refusing to surrender, the remaining Raven Guard and Salamander's Astartes stubbornly defended themselves, trying to hold off the inevitable slaughter for as long as possible. Though they suffered an atrocious number of casualties, the Loyalists managed to hold their own until the Primarchs Mortarion of the Death Guard and Angron of the World Eaters joined the fray. bolstered by the support of the infamous Imperator-class Titan Dias Era. The traitors killed tens of thousands of loyalist Astartes. At the height of the massacre, the War Master Horus entered the fray at the head of the elite Sons of Horus Terminators known as the Justarian, slaughtering the loyalists in wrathful anger. Any hope for escape for the loyalists was quickly crushed when the traitorous Iron Warriors destroyed the first wave's dropships. The loyalist starships, still orbiting the embattled planet, were also largely annihilated by the vastly superior numbers of the traitors' fleet. Despite the odds arrayed against them, some of the loyalists on the ground managed to survive against these odds. They miraculously escaped through the tightening cordon of traitors that surrounded their position. The Raven Guard fared better than the Salamanders in escaping the brutal massacre, but the Salamanders managed to assist a few surviving Astartes from the decimated Iron Hands Legion to also escape the slaughter. The Raven Guard's primarch just barely managed to board a fleeing Thunderhawk gunship to make good his escape, but was thwarted in the attempt when it was shot down almost immediately by the gunfire of the traitors. The badly damaged ship crashed on the outskirts of the Urgal Plateau. Corax had survived the crash and quickly ordered the remaining warriors of his legion to regroup. He learned to his shock that a large percentage of his legion had been utterly annihilated during the ensuing slaughter. They took to the highlands of the surrounding hills and took to the shadows, hiding from their relentless pursuers. During their flight, their position was nearly discovered by a roving armor column of traitorous Iron Warriors, but they were destroyed in a Raven Guard ambush and wiped out before they could report what they had learned. 30 days after the initial planetary assault, the future looked grim for the fleeing Raven Guard survivors. They had received no word from either the surviving Iron Hands or Salamander's legions. Corax ordered his warriors to dig in and hold position at Lurgan Ridge, while he undertook a lone reconnaissance of their original drop site to determine their options. Utilizing his innate psi abilities to escape detection, Corax successfully conducted a reconnaissance of the traitor legion's positions around the heavily fortified drop site, though the Primarch informed his men that his mission was to reconnoiter the drop site. His primary objective was to scour the Urgal Plateau for the bodies of his fallen sons, but he failed to find them. After 98 days of relentless pursuit, the Raven Guard survivors were finally backed into a literal corner. Caught upon the wind-swept mountainside, Corax's legion remained resolute. Behind the peak stretched the great salt plains that had forced them into this last defiant stand. Ahead of them massed the might of the World Eaters, the rage-driven Astartes legion of Angron, who strode at the head, roaring for the blood of his brother. A sea of white and blue World Eaters Astartes, spattered with the red of gore, swept up from the valley, intent on the destruction of the Raven Guard. Maddened by their neural implants and driven into a battle frenzy by inhuman cocktails of stimulants, the berserk warriors of the World Eaters bounded up the sloping mountainside, while the tanks and guns provided covering fire. Every warrior bellowed his eagerness to fulfill the blood oaths he had sworn to his Primarch. But before they could utterly eradicate the surviving Raven Guard Astartes, the World Eaters were attacked from an unexpected quarter. Broad-winged aircraft plunged down from the scattering of clouds, missile pods rippling with fire. A swath of detonations cut through the ranks of the World Eaters, ripping through their advance companies. Incendiary bombs blossomed in the heart of the approaching army, scattering white-hot promethium over the steep slopes. Corax looked on with suspicion as blistering pulses of plasma descended from orbit, cutting great gouges into Angron's legion. The roar of jets became deafening as dropships descended on pillars of fire, black dropships emblazoned with the badge of the Raven Guard. The legionnaires scattered to give the landing craft space to make planetfall. As soon as the thick hydraulic legs touched the ground, the ramps wind down and boarding gateways opened. The Raven Guard met their rescuers in stunned disbelief. These dropships were part of a desperate rescue mission that had been devised by Commander Bran, a Raven Guard captain who had been left in charge of the Legion's homeworld of Deliverance. Without further delay, the Raven Guard survivors quickly prepared for embarkation and escaped aboard the dropships, breaking for orbit and leaving behind the frothing berserkers of the World Eaters, their angry primarch futilely baying for blood. With his legion severely depleted, a critically wounded Corax was brought back to Terra in a stasis tube. Healed in body but not in soul, Corax eventually returned to his home world of Deliverance to rebuild what remained of his legion. While traveling from Istvaan V, Corax dwelt upon why he had fled from the confrontation with Conrad Curze and Lorgar, and realized that he had felt fear when facing the Night Haunter, not fear of death, but the realization that but for a twist of fate, Corax could have landed upon Nostramo instead of Lycaeus, and become a monster as savage as Curze. Consumed by the loss of over 75,000 of his legion's Astartes, his flight from the Night Haunter, and obsessed with thoughts of revenge against Horus, Corax ordered his survivors to return to Terra, where he intended to ask the Emperor for help in rebuilding his devastated legion. The Emperor, sensing his son's desperation, was somehow able to divert part of his psychic might in order to grant Corax what he was looking for. Through a psychic vision, Corax asked for a rapid and effective solution to restore his legion's might. The Emperor, feeling the righteous intent behind his son's question, implanted in his brain some selected memories concerning the project for the creation of the primarchs and the exact place where the ancient laboratory was to be found. However, stated the Emperor, the laboratory was well guarded by a complex system called the Labyrinth, and it was up to Corax himself to find a way to pass through it. Corax was successful in this task, and what he obtained was the common genome all primarchs shared. From this genome, through tough selection, the Emperor created each of the 20, granting each of them some particular and well-defined traits, such as psychic powers or increased strength, along with a number of commonly shared feats: increased growing rate, regenerative powers, intellectual acumen, and so on. Before Corax departed the Sol system with this new technology, he was asked by Malcador to take part in the Beredetum incursion on traitor-occupied Mars. Corax agreed, though it later turned out to be an elaborate ambush planned by the traitors under Lucas Chrome, a founding member of the Dark Mechanicum. However, most of the loyalists were able to escape, Corax included. Once back on Deliverance, Corax tasked his chief apothecary, Vincent VI, of retrieving the correct Raven Guard genome and start the direct implantation on fresh recruits. With the assistance of the loyalist Mechanicum Genitor Nixon Orlandrias, Six actually accomplished the task and went so far as to approach complete removal of the progenoid glands. From the correct genome, in fact, the whole Space Marine would have grown directly, all his enhanced organs already present. The only exception would have been the black carapace, due to its synthetic nature. The carapace permits the interface to the power armor, and it's not a real organ itself. In this way, the Progenoids would have been useless for future generations. With this knowledge, around 500 new war-ready Space Marines were created in few weeks. It is at this point that an infamous treachery took place. Some Astartes of the Alpha Legion, in a plan orchestrated by the Primarch Alpharius Omegon themselves, infiltrated the Raven Guard after the drop site massacre. To obtain this, Alpha Legion's apothecaries grafted the facial traits of some dead Raven Guards over the face of their own legionnaires. The objective was to hinder the Raven Guard using their obtained knowledge, as this would have displaced the balance against Horus's forces, said by Cabal emissaries. Of course, since free to act as best suited, Alpharius Omegon had in mind also to recover the secret knowledge in order to expand their legion too. With the help of renegade Mechanica Magos, Anithrax, and his forces on Kiava, the Alpha Legion tainted the original genome recovered from the laboratories of the Emperor on Terra. This was accomplished introducing a virus-vectored mutagen based on demonic blood. Thus, the successive implantations resulted in still operational but deeply mutated Astartes exhibiting scales, horns, fangs, tails, overgrown muscles, and similar features. However, while the plan to corrupt the new Astartes was successful, the attempt by the Alpha Legion to destroy the Legion's gene seed was not. After this outburst of mutations and the discovery of the Alpha Legion infiltrators, Corax decided to stop the rebuilding of the Raven Guard and led his warriors, along with all the war-capable mutated marines, with small squads, striking like lightning on the enemy weak spots. Following this battle on Ravendale, Corax still was committed to combating the forces of Horus. Compensating for his devastated legion's small numbers, he conducted raids, hit-and-run attacks, and instigated uprisings on traitor-controlled wars. These included actions on Constanix II, Scarato, and Carandiro. Eventually, Corax reassembled the entirety of his surviving legion at the Dexius system. There he contemplated on the future of the Raven Guard, with many of his legion wishing to return to Terra to aid the Emperor against Horus's offensive. After evading a Night Lord's attack, Corax was again influenced by the visions of Marcus Valerius, who saw that the Space Wolves were on the verge of destruction. Corax led the Raven Guard in the Battle of Yarant to aid the Space Wolves against traitor forces. During the battle, Corax led a suicidal last stand alongside Bjorn, but after witnessing the arrogance and vanity of Horus's forces, realized that it was not up to him to determine when he would die. He was a servant of the Emperor and would continue to aid him against the traitors until he met his end. Thus Corax led an evacuation from Yarant and expressed his intent to continue resisting the traitor's war master from the shadows. Corax and Russ made for deliverance, eventually meeting up with Lionel Johnson at the Raven Guard's Fortress Monastery. The Lion was quick to question the Raven Lord's absence from major fronts of the war, but his ire is put to rest by Russ, who points at the survival of his own legion as evidence of their worth. Russ declared he will join the Lion's crusade of vengeance, including warriors equipped with the new Mark VI power armor produced on Kiava. Corax, however, was cautious to commit his bloodied legion to what he saw as a needlessly spiteful waste, and only assigned a small expeditionary force of his Raven Guard to the Lion's forces. Even in this role, Corax's forces were used to eliminate key enemy targets ahead of the main Dark Angel's fleet in order to spare entire worlds from annihilation. Raven Guard forces later took part in the siege of Barbarus, assailing the home world of the Death Guard alongside the Dark Angels and Space Wolves. After the Horus heresy, Corax remained unable to forget the growling monstrous aberrations of humanity that he had personally created. By the time Corax finally managed to rebuild his legion to anywhere near its pre-heresy strength, the Horus heresy had ended, and Robert Guilliman's Codex Astartes required that the legion be split into smaller, more flexible 1000 Astartes units known as chapters. Never again would one man wield the power of an entire Space Marine legion. Knowing that Guilliman's vision was true and necessary, Corax grudgingly split his remaining forces into the new second founding successor chapters, but after pondering for solar hours as to what should be done to atone for his sins, he decided to administer the Emperor's peace to the remaining aberrant Raven Guard mutants personally, praying for both their souls and his. Racked with guilt following the executions, Corax locked himself in his personal chamber in the Raven Spire, the Raven's Tower, begging for the recently ascended Emperor's mercy. Nobody knows if Corax received the absolution he prayed for, but a standard year to the day after he had locked himself in the Raven Spire, he left the tower and the world of deliverance itself on a course toward the Eye of Terror, never to be seen again within Imperial space. His last recorded words were nevermore. Unbeknownst to all within the Imperium, after his disappearance, Corax took up his prior role as the Emperor's justice made manifest. He had resolved during his time in the Raven Spire to enter the Eye of Terror in pursuit of the traitor legions following the Siege of Terror and hunt down his treacherous brother primarchs. He began with the architect of the Imperium's ruin, Lorgar of the Word Bearers, within the Eye of Terror, on the demon world of Sikaris that the Word Bearers had claimed for their own in the wake of the Great Scouring. The Dark Apostle Kaltar sought to raise a huge edifice to the glory of his Gene Father Lorgar and his Dark Gods, but his work was derailed when something began killing the Word Bearers under his command. His slaves told him that it was a shadow that rose up and tore the heretic Astartes to shreds. When the shadow finally came for Kaltar, he could not hope to fight it, so he took the Word Bearers' survivors and withdrew to Lorgar's sanctum, desperate for the Urizen's aid. The Lorgar that emerged was immensely different from the man Corax had bested on the killing fields of Istvaan V, a golden-skinned giant wrapped in a cloak of throbbing chaos ruins and holding a vicious spiked mace. Corax's brain now radiated power and cruelty, but Corax had changed as well. Constant exposure to the energies of the warp within the Eye of Terror had stripped away the mortal facade the Emperor had bestowed upon his Gene sons and revealed the true warp-formed consciousness that lived beneath the surface of every primarch. Now a humanoid creature of blades and living shadow that could transform into an enormous flock of ravens, the being that was Corax hurled himself at Lorgar, trading immense blows that would fell a space marine many times over. The two demigods battled back and forth across the massive temple to the ruinous powers, but as before, the Raven Lord gained the upper hand. Summoning a nimbus of power, Lorgar forced back his black-eyed tormentor and staggered into the Templum Inficio. At the tower in the heart of everything, Lorgar plunged into a hidden chamber and slammed the obsidian doors behind him. Screaming his rage and frustration, Corax swore to Lorgar that even if it took millennia, he would hunt down the Urizen and tear him limb from limb. On the black door, blocking the Raven Lord from his prey, two runes flared into being, spelling out a simple message: deny fate. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, hit that like button, leave a comment for the algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more of Warhammer 40,000 lore.